Alleluia. Rejoice and be glad, your reward will be great in heaven. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
The Lord be with you.
In your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you.
Glory to you, O Lord. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain, and after he had sat down, his disciples came to him. He began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the clean of heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they insult you and persecute you, and utter every kind of evil against you falsely because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward will be great in heaven." The Gospel of the Lord.
Good evening, everyone. We have this beautiful verse from St. Paul tonight in his letter to the Corinthians, where he says, "Consider your own calling, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise by human standards, not many were powerful, not many were noble birth. Rather, God chose the foolish of the world to shame the wise, and the weak of the world to shame the strong." If you think for a moment about who God called, especially Jesus, when he came to his ministry, it was typically not going to be people who were well learned and schooled, people of noble birth or lords or kings, but think of who he called first, the Blessed Mother, the first apostle, if you will. Just a young girl from Nazareth. No one would have given her a second look in terms of being someone of prestige or power, and yet he chose the simple, holy virgin. Many of us may have overlooked her. And then our first pope, Peter, a man who was sometimes brash, sometimes spoke in his bravado, got himself in trouble, right? The one time Jesus had to say to him, "Get behind me, Satan." And then James and John and even some of the rest. I think that God did that so that no one could say that the church began from human origins, that it was truly miraculous. Not to take anything away from these folks. They were quite holy, actually very holy, as many of them gave their lives for our faith. Now here's the thing, when St. Paul wrote this, it wasn't just for them or the people who were alive at that time. God still continues to call apostles and to put us in the positions that we are according to his good will. Now, sometimes I'll reflect even on my own life. Remember the song from the Talking Heads, "How Did I Get Here"? Remember that old video from the 80s? Once in a Lifetime, I think it was called. And I'll say to myself, I'm laying in bed at night after I do my prayers, how did I get here? I don't mean necessarily Holy Family, but, being in this stage of my life, being a priest, and then I'll think back to when I was younger. would have people chosen me out of the crowd, let's say, when I was 15? Maybe not, right? And then I think back to those days, and I remember that even though I didn't understand the calling fully at that time, it was there, and that God puts people in our lives that helps us with each of our own callings, whatever they may be. And I can remember one powerful moment, and there is one person in here who'll be able to vouch for this. I was a sophomore in high school. Now, what I'm about to say, you guys must not do. Right? Don't follow this example. It was different in the 80s, right? The rules were a little less stringent, and this will go also with the beauty of education, because we're still going through Catholic Schools Week and education all around. And I was the type of kid, I went to school, I don't know if I should say this, Dom is actually recording this. I was the type of kid that went to school for two reasons. One, because my friends were there, and two, that's where we played football and basketball. I did not necessarily go there for education. And the rules back in those days, you were allowed to fail 2 classes and still play. Can you imagine? Now I think if you get below a C, you're done, right? So even though I may have been lazy in my schoolwork, I wasn't a dumb kid, so I realized I only got to work in 5 classes. And I could still play football and basketball. And that's what I did until it caught up to me and it got away from me. And there was an English teacher in our high school. My friend Paul, who I went to high school with, is here. He'll remember him. Mr. P.J. Shelley. A very eccentric man, right? Weird in some sense, but a beautiful man, a good man. And I was failing his class without even realizing it. I thought he was the one that I was passing. So he called me out after class one day. He says, John, I went down to your guidance counselor, and you're failing 3 classes, including mine, and this means as of next week, you can no longer be on the basketball team. Oh, that crushed me. So here I am pleading with him in the hallway. You got to pass me. Don't worry, I'm going to do good. I'll study. I'll do the tests. He knew that I was lying. He knew that once he wrote and passed me, that I wasn't going to do that. So he says, I'm only going to take you back. I'm only going to pass you on one condition. He goes, I know you don't like to study. You're going to do something else. Now, this was a teacher who was able to think outside of the box. And I don't think you can get away with this either in these days. He said, I want you to read 1,600 pages a quarter. And I promise you, you don't have to do any other work. But as you're done with every book, I'm going to sit with you, interview you, and you're going to tell me what that book was about. And I don't mean just a simple kind of synopsis. You're going to get into the book. I said, 1,600 pages is a lot. The only book I ever read was The Life of Mickey Mantle. He says, no, you're going to do this. And I shook his hand, and the very first book he handed me was called The Hobbit. I was done in 2 days. I couldn't believe it. My mom was even surprised when she saw me reading a book at the house. The next day, he goes, I got 3 more of those, right? The Lord of the Rings. I think I was done in 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. And I read and read and read. I think I was reading between 25 and 2,800 pages a quarter for a kid who didn't do any studying. When I look back on that, I realized, and he didn't even realize this, he was being an apostle to me because he got me interested in reading. And what went from Tolkien to C.S. Lewis and Stephen King, as I got older, turned into St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, the fathers of the church, modern theologians. And I remember sitting in my second year theology, and I'm in class, And it took me till then, all the way from 15 years old, all the way up to almost 30. I finally realized I'm reading this book from whoever the modern theologian was because Mr. Shelley sent me on this path. He had so much to do with my vocation without even realizing it. I finally told him this about 2 or 3 years ago. His wife had passed and he had called me when I was out in Galloway, and I told him that story. And he was crying on the other end of the phone. I think that each and every one of you, even though you don't have the same story as me, you have one. And there have been people in your lives that have motivated you enough that you're here right now as an apostle sitting in this church. What I think we need to do is reflect back on all of those good folks, and especially God, right, who called us, right? Let me repeat again what St. Paul said, because when I was 15, I would have said no. Here it is. Consider your own calling, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise by human standards. That's true. I was failing 2 classes a quarter. And not many were powerful. That's also true because I only controlled my little corner of the world. Not many were of noble birth. I was born in Astoria, Queens. Rather, God chose the foolish of the world. At times I was foolish. And God chose the weak of the world to shame the strong. And God chose the lowly and the despised of the world, those who count for nothing, to reduce those who have something to nothing, so that we may never boast before God, and recognize that each and every one of our callings to be an apostle comes from God first, and then from all of those others who are in our lives for the good. Maybe tonight before you go to bed, you can reflect on your own lives, thank all of those people who have helped you to get to where you are now, and most of all, thank our Lord. God bless you. Remember to do your homework.